Hello, I'm Sinead O'Hart and I'm the author of the Star-Spun Web. I'm delighted to know you'll be reading my book as part of your role as a junior jury for the KPMG Children's Books Ireland Book Award 2020. I'm delighted to have been shortlisted for this award. It means a great deal to me. And I'm here today to talk to you about some of the themes in my book, specifically the theme of alternate realities and other worlds, and how I went about creating one for my book. So we'll talk about other worlds, alternate realities, cats in boxes. Don't worry, but it'll all be explained as we go. But we'll begin with a short reading from my book. So I'm going to start by reading you the prologue to the Star-Spun Web. It takes place about 12 years before the main plot begins, when our protagonist Tess is still a baby. So here we go. Through the hollow darkness of a winter's night, a man was running. "It's all right, darling," he murmured to the tiny baby bundled in his arms. "Not much further now." Snow fell all around them, making dizzying patterns in the air. The going underfoot was slushy, and the man's feet were cold. His mind flashed with quick, sharp thoughts made painful by anxiety. What had they done with his wife? How long did he have before they came looking for him? Would he have time to get the baby to safety? One thought was so urgent that it drowned out all the others. She'll only be 2 worlds away. Will it be enough? His thoughts were shattered as a sudden cry split the air, loud and shrill, a call of triumph. It came from behind the running man, from the far end of the street. He stopped, peering over his shoulder through the lacework made by the snow. Lights! Indistinct figures moved against the night, muffled tightly in scarves and hats, and another voice shouted. A face, pale in the darkness, turned in his direction. The man spun round and began to run once more. The tram wires overhead seemed to hum, despite the lateness of the hour, and he hopped across the tracks as he made a desperate dash across the road, landing heavily on the pavement at the far side. He paused long enough to catch his breath, feeling his heart hammer, and then he was off again. Through it all, the baby, his daughter, slept as though she were tucked safely in the nursery he and his wife had prepared for her when things were different. Seconds later he came to a slithering halt outside a tall, narrow building on a street corner that faced a wide bridge over a streetlight speckled river. It loomed into the night sky like a pale cathedral, its roof lost in the darkness. He gazed up, hoping he had the right place. Quickly he settled his child into the crook of one arm while he pulled an object smaller than his palm from a pocket with his other hand. He adjusted its face, listening for the click, and then rubbed his thumb across the object's surface. A void opened at its center, the barest whir giving away the complex mechanism that powered it. He raised the object to his eye, peering through the void, and looked at the building again. He saw the differences straight away. Shutters closed where they had been open, a flowering window box where there shouldn't be, and his throat tightened. He glanced up, reading the words above the doorway. In this world, at this time, the building was an insurance company headquarters, but he had to hope that what he'd seen was true, and that somewhere else it bore a different name. A place where she'll be safe, he said. He thought, a home. He kneeled, the snow trickling through his thin trousers, and laid his daughter down as gently as he could in the alcove of the building's front door. He checked one last time that the envelope thick with banknotes was securely tucked into her blankets, and he placed the object in beside it, making sure it was hidden from view. Then he kissed the baby's warm forehead. He sobbed, the pain of losing her so soon after his wife almost too much to bear, before gritting his teeth and getting to his feet. He turned his back on his baby and stepped out into the haze of the streetlights, snow pattering on his suddenly empty arms. "I'm here," he roared, his tears hot. "Come on then. What are you waiting for?" The man strode into the middle of the road as the snow flowed around him, glancing down the shadows of the street he'd just come from, where dark-clothed figures lurked. They were closing on him, not bothering to hurry now. They had no need. The man faced them down, his chest heaving, his throat aching and sore. Slowly they circled him, as though mocking everything he had lost. Finally he clenched his fists and ran straight for them. The sound of their truncheons raining down on his head and back made the baby's eyes pop open in shock. She opened her tiny mouth to cry, but between taking in a breath and letting it out again, she vanished without a trace. So, as you can see at the end of the prologue, something significant happens to Tess. But what is it? Well, the world of the Star-Spun Web is more like 2 worlds, really. The action happens between our capital city, Dublin, and another city named Hurdleford, which is like Dublin in many ways, but unlike it in a lot of other ways. Early in the book, we learn that Tess has the power to travel between her own reality and another reality, and she had that power as a baby. So she managed to move between Hurdleford and other worlds, and nobody really knew how or why. And in the first chapter of the book, Miss Ackerby, the woman who had raised Tess from almost the day she was born, tells her, "When you were very small and your extraordinary abilities began to appear, I made some discreet inquiries of a scientific nature. Over the course of making those inquiries, I made a friend who, until a few years ago, was a professor of physics in a university in Ostravica." Now, this professor of physics is not named in my book, but he's based very loosely on a famous scientist you may have heard of, this guy here, Hermann Schrodinger, who was Austrian. Ostravica in my book, is an old word for the area that's now Austria. And the real life Schrodinger actually lived in Dublin in 1941, which is the year the year that my book takes place. He founded the Dublin Institute for Advanced Studies, and he lived here for a long time. He was a refugee from Hitler's Germany. But one of his famous experiments, one of his famous thought experiments, is one called Schrodinger's cat. Maybe you've heard of it. And here we have the cats in boxes. So Schrodinger's cat is an experiment where you're asked to imagine that there's a cat in a sealed box with a tiny amount of radioactive material also inside the box. And if the radioactive material is released, it will kill the cat. But don't worry, there's no actual cats. No actual cats were harmed in this experiment. So as long as we as humans have no way of looking inside the box, we don't know at any particular point whether or not the cat is alive or dead. So technically speaking, scientifically speaking, it's possible to say that the cat exists as both a live and a dead animal at the same time. But as soon as we open the box, as soon as we observe, as soon as we change things and look in at the cat, we know straight away whether or not it's alive or dead. And so the two realities, the dead cat and the living cat, sort of collapse into one. So Schrodinger was a physicist, and he did a lot of work in the area of quantum mechanics, which looks at things on a teeny tiny scale, examining atoms and subatomic particles. And he wondered a lot about what reality is, how it's made, how it's put together, and how many realities there are. And Schrodinger was one of the first people to come up with something called the many worlds theory, which imagines that all possible outcomes in any given scenario can and possibly do exist all together simultaneously, but that they don't necessarily interact, because if they did, like when we opened the box in the cat experiment, they would collapse into one reality. So I find these theories fascinating, and I'm the first to admit I don't have the mathematical brain to understand the science behind them, but the concepts really interest me as a layperson. And I was inspired a lot by Schrodinger's work and by the work into quantum mechanics by other physicists as well, while I was writing my own book. I love the idea that every choice we make perhaps makes another universe spring into existence, one that goes off on its own path without any interference from us, and that there might be other realities out there where you and me and everybody we know is living a completely separate life to the one we live here. And I also like the idea that these branches can't interact, because if they did, they would collapse. Those ideas underpin a lot of what I talk about in the Star-Spun Web. And when it came to creating Tess's world, I used my interest in these theories, and I thought about another version of Dublin and another version of Ireland where the history we know didn't happen, an Ireland which hadn't separated from the United Kingdom. And Tess's country is called the Britannian Isles. Do you know why? Maybe think about the words Britannia, the word Britannia, what it might mean. And do you know why her city is called Hurdleford? If you look up the translation of the Irish name for Dublin, Baile Átha Cliath, you might find the reason why it's called Hurdleford. And all the place names in the book, maybe with one or two exceptions, have their basis on real life place names in Dublin. So maybe have a think and see, can you figure out where I got the names from? And I was also inspired by the real life Lafayette building, which is on the corner of O'Connell Bridge in Dublin. It's the building that Tess's father leaves her at in the prologue of the book that I've just read. In our world and in his world, in 1941, it was an insurance company headquarters, but in the book, the building is Ackerby's home for lost and foundlings, where Tess grows up and where she has her childhood and where she's very dearly loved. And it's where the book kicks off. It's where she starts her journey from. And I love the Lafayette building. Whenever I passed it when I lived in Dublin, I always said I want to put that building in a book. So I did, and I'm really glad that I was able to do that. So I hope you've enjoyed learning a little bit more about my inspirations for my other worlds, and how I did them, and why I chose the names I chose, and maybe think about how you would create your own alternate reality, and what theories you would use to underpin it, and the clever choices you would make for your place names and your people's names. And thanks so much for listening, and I hope you enjoyed the talk. Bye bye.